who cares? I like asking that question, and not so much in the cynical sense, but really in the literal sense. So to ask yourself when you show up in your collaborations, your work, or wherever that might be, to ask yourself the question, who cares when you come and bring something to the organization? If you bring attention or an idea, to really ask, does the organization care? Do I care? Or ideally both. Right? So because if you bring something to the organization and the organization doesn't care, don't bother it. Leave it alone. You care. By all means, process it, but outside of the bounds and the context of the organization, so that the organization's resources are not used to serve your personal needs. Because that's purpose manifestation, right? Effective purpose manifestation requires all resources should serve organizational purpose. And what we've just identified, if only you care and the organization doesn't care, you're wasting the organization's resources. Now that feels a bit impersonal and maybe even a bit sad or scary. The people that show up within that organization might still collectively care about what you bring. And they might still all show up to serve you and whatever it is that you're bringing. But outside of the boundaries of that organization, they come together in different context. And so it's crucially important to answer this question time and time again, and bring with it a role awareness to yourself and to the entire organization. But also, of course, the organization needs the tools to allow you to answer this question. Because generally organizations don't have those tools. If I am the CEO and I'm passionate about my pet project, the organization cares because I'm the CEO and I personally care. The organization has not given us the tools to figure out what that difference is. Like a nice anecdote for me personally, I founded 2 IT companies. And I founded 2 exactly because of this reason. I, at one point, I wanted to kind of shove something into my initial IT company that I started up, until I realized the organization does not care. It does not care about this extra idea I wanted to bring in. And I personally cared. So what I did, I created a new company, a new IT organization to serve that specific purpose. And that benefited both me personally and the initial IT organization, because its resources were not misused to serve my personal needs. Now, the tools to answer these questions is really, I'll get to that in a second as well, but it's really all about governance, roles, circles, accountabilities, purpose, to really figure out, hey, what is it that I'm bringing, and does the organization care, or does my context that I'm trying to serve, the role might be served, focusing on marketing or whatever it might be, really need what it is that I'm bringing. And this is a constant evolution that we need to bring into a heartbeat within the organization to constantly figure out what is it that we're serving, and do we still have the right people that are showing up serving this organization in pursuit of purpose. I mentioned the heartbeat, and I think this is quite an important concept. And the way I like to frame organizations is as having 3 different heartbeats that are going at all times. We generally don't distinguish between these different heartbeats. And as a result, things kind of feel chaotic and arrhythmic, like there is a whole lot of stuff going on all the time. The 3 different heartbeats I like to point out are an operational heartbeat that's faster, that's most alive, and most of us are there most of the time. That's when we're actually doing our work. And underneath that is a structural heartbeat that is defining how we are doing our work and how are we structured to allow the operational heartbeat to function effectively and fast. And underneath that is the human heartbeat. That's where we show up as people. That's where we connect as people. That's where our communication norms live. And these different heartbeats need to be served explicitly and isolated. Because if you do not, this previous slide of who cares, this previous question on who cares, constantly gets abused. Because we cannot turn off the human heartbeat. Like, wonderful, no ignoring that, it's always on. But what that means, if we don't make an explicit space for it, tensions that show up in the interpersonal or the personal always make it to the structural and the operational. Right? So that is hijacking operational decision making for personal needs. If we want to manifest purpose, we need to eliminate that, not by saying no to the humans, not saying you are not welcome here, but the inverse. You are fully welcome here, and only human heartbeat tensions are processed here. So that we create a context within which we can really embrace our interpersonal relationships and our personal tensions, and figure out as a collective how we can serve that, how we can hear it, without it making its way into our structure and our operation. And the same goes for structure. We need to have time and a space to actually really work on the organization rather than in the organization, without being distracted by the operational needs. And only once these two heartbeats are fully served can we, without distraction, start doing the work and do it fast and effective. And this is unnatural. It's unnatural to, when we feel the urgency of the moment to get work done, to slow down, to step into the structural needs, and to slow down even more and step into the human needs. It's uncomfortable and unnatural and absolutely crucial. And I think this shift is probably the biggest shift to be made when you move to self-organization, or when you move away from management hierarchy, because it takes the longest time to actually get used to new semantics, new patterns on showing up together. And it heavily relies on facilitation, and those facilitators actually holding space for these different contexts at different times. Now, way beyond the scope of this call on what that facilitation looks like exactly, but I'll invite any and all that are interested in exploring alternative ways of facilitating and serving these different heartbeats to make themselves known, because we can't have enough people serving this differentiation of these three different contexts. Another important principle is incremental work and incremental structure. All right, so I think many of you might know processes of Scrum and Agile, coming from the software methodology, where incremental work is really baked in. What is not baked in with many organizations is incremental structure. Right? What most people know of structural changes within an organization is a reorganization every 3 years, and everybody dreads it because some people lose their job, right? Like, that's kind of the association we have with structural change. Where if we really want to self-organize and adapt to an unchanging environment, we need our structure of organization, our collective agreements, our governance to change with small steps each time a change is needed or warranted. Right? So you need to have maybe a bi-weekly or a monthly heartbeat where we check in, is the structure still serving our purpose manifestation? Do we need a new rule? Do we need a new circle? Do we need a new policy? Do we need a new agreement of sorts? So that you can actually really slowly make sure that you're constantly structured in the proper way to serve your purpose manifestation. It's important to make sure that that's incremental and not like a Big Bang theory like conventional organizations do. 3 different types of how you can structure an organization. And I think the first 2 are both quite well known to most of us. Like the idea of centralized, it's, smaller company, one boss, calling all the shots, everybody does it. Which kind of breaks down at a certain scale. And this is really where the management hierarchy excels, right? So this idea of decentralized authority, where you have parts of the authority that are delegated to middle management or lower management that can then delegate that further, and this is really where business units show up. And this is kind of how most of the world is currently organized. The tricky thing with decentralized authority in this way is that it's delegated and it can always be retracted, right? So what that means is there's always a level of fear, because people generally like to keep what they have been given. So middle managers are usually more incentivized not to do something wrong rather than to best manifest purpose, right? Because if they do something wrong, it might be taken away from them. Now, I think we all recognize those patterns. And if you move to distributed authority, that's a different game altogether. There is no central authority that delegates that authority out. That's all rooted in our governance. That's all rooted in our agreements that we, in our structural heartbeat, decide upon. And obviously, that over time needs to change and needs to adapt to figure out how to best service our purpose. But the wonderful thing is that it really incentivizes maximum purpose manifestation, because you eliminate the risk of the judgment from higher up in the hierarchy telling you that you're right or that you're wrong, right? So this whole idea of managerial reviews and stuff, if you take that out of the equation, you take out the risk of that assessment out of the equation, and it allows for freer purpose manifestation. Now, there's a lot of intricacies on how this works, and how those different patterns and how you do performance reviews, right? It's still important to figure out how we can actually make sure we've got the right people serving our purpose. A little beyond the scope of this presentation, important to note that it still does need attention. One other important differentiation between these different types of organizing is that in the first two, those little dots, they are people. In the last one, the dots, even though they're drawn as people, are roles. And one person might fill multiple roles, or one role might be multi-filled by different people, right? So people can show up in different parts of the organization. And that's also completely new. We're not used to that. Generally, you show up here and here alone. The wonderful thing is that your skills might be useful in multiple parts, in multiple circles. Let's really build a system that cherishes and celebrates that, so that you can really bring your skills to the right part of the organization, or the multiple right places within the organization. And one important part I also want to call out is the idea of agreements as a safety net. Not so much as a needed bureaucracy to tie everything down. Ideally, we are just in our operational heartbeat doing the work effectively, oblivious to our underlying agreements. Right? That's really that's utopia. That's just, hey, we are manifesting purpose and nothing is in our way. We're doing our thing. Now, if for some reason we are harming purpose, or not manifesting it as effectively as we can, then our agreements should start showing up to rectify that wrong. So that if somebody shows up and brings a personal tension, our agreements are there to make sure that that personal tension is dealt with in the right context without it harming operational purpose. So that's really how I like to see agreements. Because again, I think often agreements are kind of seen as, hey, somebody is wielding power over me, where an agreement is different. No, you step into agreement with this collective so that we can manifest purpose properly. And they should be a minimum viable set, right? So I think it's a wonderful pattern to start actually removing and deleting some agreements if they're no longer needed. It's not necessarily a rule book that just always keeps growing. But I think it's an important pattern to keep in mind, that they are their minimum viable set of agreements to allow us to manifest purpose, so that we don't fall into harmful patterns. And harm here is defined by harming purpose manifestation, not necessarily harmful in the general sense.